Hello and welcome back to the final day of this year's OpenRAN Summit, brought to you by Fierce Wireless. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Oliver Ward, your host for the show. As always, allow me to start by thanking the sponsors of this session, Mavenir, Samsung Electronics, Robin, Ericsson, and Parallel Wireless. So you can best prepare yourselves, here's what to expect. Kicking us off, we'll have our partner keynote by John Baker from Mavenir. Then at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, we'll have our panel discussion moderated by Prakash Sangam from Tantra Analysis. Then to finish the session at 12 p.m. Eastern, we'll hear from Steve Papa from Parallel Wireless as he delivers the closing keynote. As always, be sure to submit your questions in the Q&A tab at the top of the screen and to check out our partner content hub for any free content provided by our partners. So without any further ado, I will hand you over to John.
Today's rapidly evolving networks require leading-edge technologies. DISH has accepted the challenge and is currently deploying the world's first 5G standalone network with Open vRAN on a public cloud. By adopting an open architecture model, DISH's network will have a significant benefit over traditional vertical networks. The future includes increased security, network slicing, services orchestration, and the ability to integrate best-of-breed vendors of their choice. It's never been done before. The DISH network deployment with Mavenir's Open vRAN solution is changing the mobile industry. More importantly, it's real. The Mavenir team proves it by capturing live test data on a Samsung phone. The 5G SA DISH network is deployed on a public cloud using Mavenir's fully containerized Open vRAN. Straight from the Las Vegas Strip, one of over 140 sites in the deployment, Mavenir shows results of the live demonstration of dual-band 5G connectivity at lightning speeds. As they drive, the throughput test is initiated, topping out at over 270 megabits per second. Besides showing phenomenal speed, DISH expects this fully fledged 5G network to cost less money than its competitors invest in their networking during a single year. Leveraging native AWS tools and a Kubernetes platform to deploy this economical solution eliminates duplicate costs and development time. Mavenir's Open vRAN CU runs on Amazon's EKS, so it natively uses the Kubernetes distribution from AWS. With a service-based architecture, DISH has unlimited capability for the future. They can automatically change or add new applications whenever people have innovative ideas, without depending on specific legacy systems. This also removes third-party dependency, dual cost, and provides direct access to the tools for monitoring and orchestration. New agility lets DISH respond to changes quickly, implement innovative ideas faster, and improve speed to market. In addition to Mavenir, DISH is orchestrating multiple vendors, all supplying different components for the cloud-native standalone 5G core. A trusted partner, Mavenir is no stranger to charting new territory in a multi-vendor environment. One network, any cloud, all software. Trust the future with Mavenir.
Great to be with you today. I'm going to unpack the video that you've seen concerning the DISH deployment, which is really scaling the OpenRAN architecture into the hyperscale platforms. So this next slide really gives an overview of the network architecture that we've just seen that's been publicly launched in the United States. It's the first really innovative architecture with multiple industry firsts actually in that deployment. First of all, it's using Open vRAN, with different partners across the RAN platform, packet core services, etc., and bringing all those entities together in one fully operational network. The network uses radios of the 5G standalone sub-6 band, so low band, mid band, but also using FDD rather than just TDD, and multiple carriers on those radios. So it essentially works out at almost like 5 radios per sector in bringing the Open RAN architecture together. And then last but not least, and the subject of today's discussion, is that the RAN is sort of deployed in a mixed public and hybrid private cloud scenarios. At the point of launch, there were over 3,500 sites activated in Vegas and other markets. This is rapidly building out to 20,000 sites this year. So Dish is well on target to do that with scaling this platform. So, if we go back to the basic principles of why build a multi-vendor ecosystem, and this is including the cloud players in this discussion, it's allowing Dish in this case to sort of pick the best of vendors, reduce integration costs and build a resilient network. Clearly, goals of getting into an open environment is really about innovation and finding new ways for revenue generation. And this is truly shown to increase the deployment speed of 5G and essentially change the business models that are driving what used to be a very CapEx oriented business model into an Opex based business model. So a lot of firsts again in terms of bringing this together. The major issues that sort of get raised around this in discussion is, what about system integration and how to bring all these pieces together? But through the work that certainly we as Mavenir have been doing with our operator partners is to really help lead and bring together the different system components from different vendors to ensure system integration is done correctly and the quality of service is to the respective SLAs. But no rocket science in terms of the system integration side of it is, operators know how to do this today, vendors know how to do this today, and it really is just jointly bringing together the different component vendors and ensuring the network has no issues. And as I say, operators have been doing this from day one. It's just that in the case of Open RAN, system integration is actually carried out by different vendors holding the different contractual pieces of the agreements. The major premise that the network has been built on, to allow it to scale is what is termed CI/CD or continuous integration and continuous deployment. Continuous integration, continuous deployment is really a set of tools and processes to manage the life cycle of the CNFs. This allows the seamless deployment of updated container images to be deployed as and when in the network. This is ensuring that it's less prone to updating different configuration parameters, etc. So once the configuration is proven and tested, it can be rapidly deployed across the network. And this allows for auditing, security, version control, image updates and configuration, etc., to take place somewhat automatically. And again, this changes the dynamics of how to build a mobile network, because you're not having to rely on firmware versions that are sitting out at cell sites, etc., and technicians to essentially go out and upgrade that firmware. This is allowing hundreds of deployments a day, essentially, if you like, of different versions and different features, and the network is being continuously updated, continuously integrated, and this is sort of contributing to the speed of deployment. So, continuous integration, continuous deployment is really the key mechanism for, once you've built the first few sites and proven it, then this is really how you scale into the network. And using cloud platforms such as Amazon or Azure, the tools are in place to essentially scale and turn up processes and services where you actually need them. And so, from a real live implementation, seen through the work together with Dish, 80% reduction in containerization, deployment and updates when compared to traditional deployment models. And this is starting with the basic design of the network through security, installing the infrastructure, installing the network functions, allowing continuous update of the network functions. And put a design out and you see that there's some parameter changes that are needed, you can make those parameter changes across the whole network, essentially instantaneously, of bringing those new container images to the site and then essentially turning it up after testing. So, and this is really where I think there's still some development to do in terms of automation of test. Clearly, in the Dish case, there's test for the end-to-end network capability, but also end-to-end test of the individual functions is still in a process of being developed for the Open RAN ecosystem. So continuous deployment, continuous integration, and test automation are essentially the major elements of scaling into the cloud and in ensuring rapid deployment of an open ecosystem and an open architecture. What's going on in the Open RAN ecosystem and why, essentially the opinion of the industry sort of somewhat changed over the last 3 years from, when we started the journey back in 2018. Obviously, everybody was, sort of focused at vendor lock-in and, network costs and services. But, we've seen a sort of a shift in the industry opinion in terms of what people are looking for in terms of building these networks. And it really comes down to, faster, greater control of feature deployment. Again, vendor lock is still a key issue in the survey, but the operators are finding that through containerized platforms, web scale platforms, that they're now learning to actually do more with it in terms of writing their own apps, continuous integration, continuous deployment schedules for specific features around their network, which are unique to those networks. But cost saving is still a big part of it. It's not gone away. You see, so maybe one of the issues in the consideration, but there's a more balanced, if you like, overview of what Open RAN and open networks are really sort of trying to achieve now. And obviously, the government political situation is still a big part of this whole decision. But certainly from an Open RAN perspective, the train has left the station, and deployments are really starting to happen. And as we've seen with Dish, for instance, it's opening up new ways to do business and take what is essentially a heavy capex model and turn it into an Opex model. So in summary, we've really seen over this last 4 or 5 months is that Open RAN is proven. I think the whole discussion about what is Open RAN from a technology perspective, can it achieve the same quality of performance? I think what we've seen from Rakuten and Dish and other deployments that that you can get like for like, and that is achievable. With Dish, it's a sort of first scalable public cloud deployment with AWS that has involved some continuous development of features that will run on the AWS platform from a CUDU perspective. It is a cloud native approach to telco. So what we're seeing is the telco world is moving into the cloud world, and I think eventually we will actually see it be viewed as another leg of the internet, if you like, and we'll just see it as a cloud application. We've been through multiple integrations of radios, and as I say, from this Dish network, it's really is a world's first in the sense of you've got slivers of spectrum being concatenated in a single hardware platform, which has allowed carrier aggregation to use and get better bandwidths that are available to the end user, which in old terms would have been thought difficult. So we're seeing 5G SA on FDD frequency bands. With the launch of the network, is also voice over NR, and given the ability to have voice quality on standalone 5G networks. So again, a first in terms of putting together the 5G voice architecture to work over a standalone network. And then last but not least, a lot of discussion, well, how do you build a a multiple nines network, whether it be 5 nines, 3 nines, etc., etc. But the cloud is, inherently built with redundancy, and so far what we've seen is that, all of the sort of failure conditions and the backup conditions are sort of necessarily already in the cloud. So, when we started this journey, it was about, get the basic network out there, then, you can architect the thing for redundancy, etc., etc. But, as we move through the journey, we really found that, redundancy has been built in by the cloud providers, and so it becomes less of an issue in terms of how you build redundancy into these cloud-based telecommunication networks. So hopefully there's a quick overview of what's been going on with moving the Open RAN into the hyperscale world. It's being done. It's not a subject of when it's going to be done. It is being done. It is being proven, and it is changing business models of Open RAN networks, and hopefully allowing operators to be more profitable and focus on providing quality and services to the end user.
Thank you, John. That was great. Next up, we have our panel discussion moderated by Prakash Sangam from Tantra Analysis, and joining him, we have speakers from Robin, Ericsson, Samsung Electronics, Meta, and Dish Network. Prakash, please take it away.
Thank you, Oliver. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Let's do a quick destination check. If you are looking for the most interesting session of the day at this Open RAN Summit, then you're at the right place. That is because we are going to discuss one of the key challenges in front of the cellular industry right now, which is how to scale up this Open RAN ecosystem. And this also has both technical, economic, as well as geopolitical repercussions. Right. So let me start with some quick introductions. I'm Prakash Sangam. I'll be moderating the session. In terms of my background, I'm a founder and principal at Tantra Analyst. We are a boutique industry analyst firm covering 5G, AI, IoT, and other areas. I personally have more than 25 years of experience in the telecom world, working for AT&T, Ericsson, and Qualcomm. I write for Forbes, RCR Wireless, Spheres, and other publications. I'm also a 3GPP member. Enough about me. Let's introduce our esteemed panel, which represents different parts of the diverse Open RAN ecosystem. I would like to request each of the panelists to give a brief introduction about themselves, about their company, and also very briefly answer this question. What is the biggest challenge that you're seeing from your companies and domain perspective in scaling up Open RAN deployments? Again, a quick introduction about yourself, company, and the biggest challenge that you're seeing in scaling up. Let's start with Renuka.
Thank you, Prakash. Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. I'm part of what we call the Meta connectivity team at Meta. So Meta is former Facebook, if for some of them who haven't kind of looked at the transition recently. At Meta, our goal is to improve the connectivity for the end user, and that inherently includes the connectivity goal of improving the infrastructure. So we partner very closely with the industry partners, and we accelerate and help with the deployments and innovation for the telecom infrastructure. And to that extent, I have a dual hat here, which I wear for the telecom infra project, which is one of the projects that we have founded recently. And that project is again focused on bringing disaggregated solutions in the network to improve the connectivity overall and to also accelerate the innovation in the world. Now, in terms of challenges, we have been focusing a lot on bringing productization of Open RAN. And I would say the challenge that Open RAN is facing today is to kind of streamlining the integration of multi-vendor systems. And so for that, the Telecom Infra project is bringing together what we call the demand and the supply side in the form of aggregating the requirements and then splitting them into accessible and feasible roadmap for the vendor side of partners to kind of piece part and address the priorities of the demand side, and also to get into the release roadmap for Open RAN so that you can bring the solutions in time and in a priority manner. So I'll
Thanks,
stop
Sid.
right there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Renika. Sid?
Hey, thank you guys. Prakash, thanks for inviting me. Sid Chenamolu, I am the Vice President of Technology and Architecture for Dish. I have been with Dish since the beginning of wireless. So I've seen all of the journey, and that basically just John Baker walked through the journey. I have been there from the beginning. So I'll keep it. I think John pretty much covered what we've been doing. So about Dish Wireless on the his session. I think from my perspective, if I were to say what is the biggest challenge, is I would say release management. It's complex because, especially in the open RAN world, you have multiple vendors there, which kinds of goes to system integration that Renika mentioned. But to figure out how you want to release a product or a feature or a functionality into the production, it's a journey. It's a journey. We have to map the features. You have to map the release cycles, because you have a lot of vendors. They come with the different iterations. They come with a release every 2 weeks, every month. You have to map all of them. You have to figure out the test vectors. So all this, and figure out the observability. I think, to me, release management and the speed and agility to release features into production is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Sid. Partha?
Hey, thanks, Prakash. Hi, everyone. My name is Partha Seetala. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Robin.io. And at Robin, what we build is a Kubernetes-enabled telco cloud platform that is specially designed for running workloads such as RAN, and also other types of workloads where there is a lot of network as well as storage footprints. We also build products that allow the automation and orchestration of infrastructure as well as network services on top of that infrastructure. More recently, this year, we were acquired by Rakuten Symphony, and now I run the cloud business unit at Rakuten Symphony as their president. Now, the question of the challenge, right? I've seen the journey of telcos talking about using cloud native for 5G, 4G, and so on. And I think the challenges have been changing, right? Initially, it was a question of, hey, does it even work? We proved that. In fact, we run the first as well as right now the largest public production 5G network in the world. And then the challenge shifted from, okay, now that it works, can it deliver that promised savings in Opex and CapEx? We have proved that. Now the next challenge is, can we essentially bring all these other vendors who have these network functions that are not necessarily made as a cloud native or designed as cloud native architectures, can we essentially run them and coexist them on the same infrastructure? So the challenges keep shifting over time.
All right, thank you, Partha. Gabriel?
Thanks, Prakash, and thanks for the invite as well. So my name is Gabriel Fuglander. I work in the product line for Cloud RAN at Ericsson. Obviously, Ericsson is one of the leading RAN vendors in the industry. We are, I think, at present having 130 live 5G networks worldwide. And so I think for us, if we frame the challenge, it's a lot to do with kind of meeting that fairly high benchmark that we have established over many decades with our customers, and making sure that we can deliver on the same promise also when we talk about cloud-based 5G. So I think the challenge also comes from the fact that the integrated product that we had in the market for a long time, we had control of a lot of the components, right? And the integration is inherent to the product. Whereas here we are now in a position where we are working actively with the collaboration with our partners in the ecosystem to try to mimic that and bring it together with a common objective. And that, of course, I think what you said, Sid, that resonated really well with me in terms of how do you bring that together in terms of a release, factoring in all the different cadences that you have from different vendors in the stack, adding the application on top, and also verification of radio configurations and stuff like that. So very much kind of how do you take something that we have done for a long time and move it into a world where we actively collaborate and solve common challenges.
Thank you. Sunil?
Hey Prakash, thank you. I'm Sanil Ramachandran. I am the Director of Technology at Samsung Networks Business. I'm responsible for managing the virtualized RAN product portfolio for one of the operators in the US. And also, I have another hat I represent Samsung in the ORAN Alliance in Working Group 4 to advance the open front door initiatives. And talking about the challenges, and I kind of resonate with all of you, which already have talked through, and most of it is the same as what you guys described. I mean, we all know the telco industry is currently in a juncture where it is intersecting with the public or the cloud infrastructure industry. So these two industries are coming together, and we believe having a strong ecosystem of partners which enables the vendors from the telco world and also from the cloud infra world to be able to work together and enable each other. That's a strong ecosystem partnership. Building a strong partnership is an essential thing, and that will help in some of the challenges that Sid mentioned, having this alignment of releases and cadence and so on to get these things together. That's one thing. And then the other point Partha mentioned, the challenges are keep changing. Yes, I mean, when in the beginning, the challenge were the basic feature parity among the telco expectation to the infrastructure cloud providers expectation that has to be matched. For example, there have been very basic technical challenges in the beginning. Now, when we are in the deployment phase, there have been other challenges like how do we efficiently manage or orchestrate the VRAN software on a distributed cloud infrastructure. That has been a challenge. And even though there are systems and frameworks in place, that has to be integrated with the legacy existing backend systems in a brownfield operator case. That has been a challenge. So challenges keep
Right.
changing. But one thing is that, I mean, Samsung, we have been advanced. We have made tremendous progress on this, and have made a lot of deployments worldwide. Being one of the major vendor who have deployed virtualized RAN commercially in the US, in Europe, and in Asia, we have learned so much and come so far ahead on this journey. So, of course, I think the challenges there will be different challenges at different depending on at what point or stage you are in this process of this realizing the virtualized RAN deployment.
Thank you. All right. So, I mean, Open RAN has moved from hype to actual commercial realization right now. There are a lot of positive news, a lot of traction, and so on. At the same time, there are some concerns as well, whether this vision of lowering the barrier through Open RAN and letting very small companies to play in this field, which is very capital intensive, is whether it's really still a dream or that can be made possible or not, especially looking at how things turned out at parallel in last month or so, right? So let's get on to the questions right away. The first one I have is a lot of 5G networks are already built. At least the major operators in the world have already launched and invested in this existing network, and they've used legacy because that's what they had. So how does that hinder this notion of making Open RAN mainstream, and whether we have to wait till next phase of 5G for Open RAN for large networks of major operators, or even 6G? Let's start this with the other side of the panel, from Sanil. Sanil, your views quickly, and then
Yeah, I
I'll
mean,
go
great
around with
question.
everybody else.
Yes, yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, great one. Yeah, at Samsung, at least we have taken a slightly different approach. The question of the interworking with the legacy systems, for example, yes, that is true that the Open RAN and the virtualized RAN solutions are fairly new. This architecture is fairly new compared to the telco. For example, the 4G LTE deployments. That's all been in the traditional, mostly. I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but mostly they have been in the traditional one monolithic BBU type deployment. That is true. But from a 5G deployment, Samsung has taken a slightly different approach, where most of our 5G deployments are based on virtualized Open RAN deployment. So and then how we were able to do that, because I mean, thanks to 3GPP, for example, the technology or the architecture that 3GPP envisioned, the ENDC, the eNode B to GNode B dual connectivity feature, that is inherently allows the coexistence of the 4G network in a traditional BBU-based architecture, at the same time having 5G in the virtualized RAN architecture. This can coexist, and this is a great feature that the architecture principle that 3GPP has envisioned, and which we have made use of to deploy our 5G networks using the virtualized or open RAN concept. So from that aspect, of course, when we say Open RAN, it can be of whether sometimes it is architecturally Open RAN. It might not have the multi-vendor feature or that aspect yet in some of the operators, but still on an architecturally, even though if it is Samsung virtualized DU interacting with the Samsung radio, that has been based on the open, fully virtualized RAN design, and also based on open interfaces. So we have taken a slightly different approach there.
Thank you. Gabriel?
No, I don't really see it as an obstacle in a way. I mean, so the way we think about it, of course, we have to be mindful of the fact that we are present with huge amount of equipment with customers worldwide in the Ericsson radio system portfolio. But the way we see it, it's there are ways. In this is one, as Sunil mentioned, that you can allow for interconnect, and we also work with something called CloudLink, which is allowing us to actually connect the scheduler in the VDU to the baseband in the previous deployment, and therefore we can then allow for rapid exchange of information and allow advanced interworking features as well, like carrier aggregation, for instance, between the two deployments. So there are ways where you can actually leverage on the existing installed base while still introducing a virtualized technology into the network. And therefore, we are quite mindful of securing that the interworking is going to be quite key for a long period of time. I mean, we also meet many customers that are quite intent on sticking with an integrated solution. We will have early adopters on the cloud technology, and we will have vendors that stick in the middle. But we see that since the investment cycles in a network are rather long, we believe that it's going to be quite important to have these interworking solutions to allow for a progression-based upgrade or introduction of the technology into the network. So we're really mindful of it. It's something we can solve.
Thank you. Partha?
Yeah, Sanil and Gabriel actually mentioned some interesting points about standards, 3GPP, and so on, right? So there is, of course, that aspect to it. But if you kind of up-level the question a little bit, right? If you look at it, Open RAN, it's not just about the RAN software alone. You're also talking about a fundamentally different type of an infrastructure play underneath that, right? Now, initially, there was always, this question about, is it only for greenfield? Can brownfields really use it and things like that? But over time, what's really happening is that the total TCO savings that the combination of Open RAN and the cloud native architecture brings together is actually making the brownfield deployments take a very serious look at it, because the agility with which these services are rolled out, sites are rolled out, the lifecycle management for these network functions is done, is at a fundamentally different level, right? So as a result of that, we are seeing a lot more activity from the brownfields than we had originally anticipated about 2 years ago. So I think it's no longer a question of whether it is going to be embraced by brownfield or not. It is already happening.
Thank you. Sid, any comments? You guys are
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to hear.
greenfield, so
Yeah, I know, but it's funny to hear when you say legacy and 5G in the same sentence. Because given that 5G is just a couple of years old, right? And we're really talking about 6G. But again, I'm probably the least qualified to speak about legacy architecture. But I echo the points that Partha was trying to say, right? It's not just about what we're doing to offer a simplified service like a voice or a data. I think the existing networks are doing a pretty well job, but 5G is beyond that. It's not just about these two services only. It's about many services that we know of and many more hopefully we don't know of. So Open RAN is more about programmability as you think about private networks and other architectural changes that Open RAN allows you, that perhaps the legacy architecture might hinder an operator to move in that direction. At least that's my view.
thanks, Sid. Renika, then you on this? You're on mute, Renika. You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. I'll pretty much summarize it. I think the theme is that it's not limited to 5G and 6G only. Open RAN, again, it's about bringing flexibility and bringing what you call the disaggregation. And that is about bringing new services, innovation, and so on. End goal being obviously the North Star of TCO and so on. So that shouldn't be limited to the newer 5G and onwards interfaces for sure. We are seeing that a lot of brownfield networks are adopting some kind of disaggregation at a level it can, even though it's not necessarily an ORAN based interface, for example. There is still a way of bringing in that kind of disaggregation, having open interfaces and standard APIs and so on. So it's definitely a way of start transitioning from the legacy onwards. And then ORAN Alliance and 3GPP structured it even further for 5G onwards. So it's here to stay for sure for the newer networks.
All right. So the next series of questions I'll ask, I know somebody specifically, and if others have comments on it, chime in. Otherwise, I'll not ask those for everybody, right? So let's start with Sid on here. So Sid, when I speak to many of the Open RAN vendors who have, some have both hardware and software, especially the big ones. Some only have software, some only have hardware. But when I speak to the vendors who have both software and hardware, they mention that their software works best with the hardware. Although it works with other vendors, but it works the best, with their own hardware and software, right? And there is, business advantage, interest as well to make sure you work best with your own software and hardware. How do you see operators playing a role and solve that issue? Being a system integrator, operate themselves, or a system integrator. How do you solve
Yeah.
that?
So
Let's start
Prakash,
with
as you
Sid. Yeah.
said, right? It's a business decision by that vendor who is proposing a vertical stack. And you never see anyone saying that, hey, I don't want to offer the complete package, right? Everyone
Yeah.
wants to do that. But from an operator point of view, it's the principles and the architectural decisions that operator has to make. The decisions are there and theirs alone, where they make a conscious choice. Hey, do I invest something in the short term or do I invest something in the long term? So what is very clear in the web scale technologies for many years that we have seen, the open source, as long as things are open source and open, you see a lot more people who want to play in that field. You basically, you're opening up the playing field for hundreds of companies, thousands of smart engineers out there who can now work on your platform, your solution, a problem that you have been trying to solve. So that to me is like you have to give up on a short-term gain and say, you know what, I'm looking at something for long term. I want more people, more eyes, more brains on this one. And that is what I keeps going back to programmable network that Open RAN offers us. So I'm at least of a firm believer that although a solution can be definitely be optimized for a single purpose, if it's vertically integrated, no doubt about it, you can definitely do that. But
Yeah.
again, going back to 5G and the use cases, we are not a single purpose network. So it has to be programmable and it has to be open.
Right. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in?
No, I
I
would
mean,
actually
maybe I can.
Sorry. Go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Partha. Yeah.
I would second what Sid is saying. I mean, at the end of the day, it is right that if it's a vertically integrated stack, there are certain benefits that you can derive. But I think betting on a vertically integrated stack is essentially moving the whole world backwards, right? In a new format, if you think about it. The right way of looking at it is you have to take the benefits of hardware innovations that will happen outside the vendor. And because hardware innovations are always happening across a multiple vendor ecosystem, the right way of looking at this new architecture is to have multiple vendors at the infrastructure, at the software, at the hardware, at the network layer, all of them interoperating with each other. That is the best way to deliver the TCO savings that is promised
Right.
by Open RAN.
Thanks. Sanil, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of was about to say the same thing. I mean that
Okay.
originally there have been some speculations whether the virtualized RAN VRAN solution can offer the same performance as same as the traditional BBU or not. And what we have seen, I mean, not from a lab test or field trial, from a commercial deployment, is that the Samsung the virtualized RAN software, which is running on a COTS platform. I mean, it's a commercial off-the-shelf hardware. from a third party. I mean, third parties that we have seen is that deployment, the service KPIs, the user experience is on par. It's on par with the traditional BBU performance. So there is no question that the COTS-based hardware platform can whether or not that can provide the same performance or not. There is no question. It's field proven. We have seen it. Of course, there are still deployments with the own hardware and BBU solution, but still the virtualized RAN can provide the same on par performance as the traditional systems. That has been field proven from Samsung U.
All right, thanks. So, Gabe, let me ask you this. So, Open RAN could be single or multi-vendor. Considering that operators are very risk averse, I think most of them are starting with. There are, of course, some exceptions. Starting with single vendor, maybe with open architecture, and then going to multi-vendor in a kind of a two-step process. What have you seen, and is it different for brownfield versus greenfield? Gabriel.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we of course have relations with many customers over the world. They are quite expecting of us to take the load and be a very responsible partner to them. That's what they're used to over the years. So I think here we have to, you mentioned here, we have to separate with the vertical disaggregation, which we are fully endorsing in the Cloud Run stack. I mean, we work with multi-vendor options in terms of both the cost layer, service, and as you mentioned, and also different hardware options. So in that regard, completely open to multi-vendor. Whereas what we see is on the horizontal integration between the radio, we see still some substantial advantages of being able to systemize across the radio and the DU functionality and the CU as well, which we see gives tangible benefits for the customer. So we think there's ways to maneuver around this, and again, we also have the luxury that we have an existing portfolio where we do the completely integrated solution as well for the customers that prefer to go in that direction. So I think we're quite fortunate that we can work at the pace of the development of the ecosystem and take it step by step. And right now we see that the vertical multi-vendor offering and taking advantage of the cloud technologies we see in the market is what gives a lot of value to the customer in that part of the portfolio.
Anybody else has any views on it? Renika?
And we kind of saying the same thing here, that it's a disaggregation at the root of it, right? So it could be at multiple levels. The approach they have to take is to, are you solving for the near term or are you solving for the long term, like Sid said? In the near term, of course, everybody knows the challenge will be easier if you bring your own hardware and software for a DU, for example. You're in control of it. So that could be the way to then disaggregate at the RU level and then go with the first phase and so on. But eventually, more optionality, more openness, that is what will give the whole advantage of Open RAN. And so we shouldn't stop to having a vertically integrated solution just for the immediate gains, I would say.
Anybody else want to chime in? Otherwise, so Renika, next one is for you. Sorry, go ahead. Who was it?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, Renika. With cloud native, a major question every operator faces is whether to do their own private cloud or go to public cloud. I know we have both examples. For example, Dish opted for public cloud through Verizon. Through Amazon. And I talked to Verizon, and they are hell bent on building their own private cloud, right? So and there are many operators like that who are on either side of this aisle. So what is your view on it, and what are some of the pros and cons of going with private versus public?
Okay. Not speaking for the MNOs, we are obviously not an MNO, but the insights I could add is from the experience on integration and so on, and for what we have seen for our own data centers and so on. So I would say the private versus public, the choice is very much in terms of how customized and your own solution you want versus how much of a economies of scale you believe in, and you want to kind of join the industry in terms of making a public cloud more accessible and so on. So there could be parameters that each of the operators could be kind of weighing differently. I do see benefits of having a public cloud, and that would be that you are not necessarily going in a customized route, but rather joining others in terms of optimizing that cloud environment itself. You do lose on some of the aspects of having more flexibility and control, but that's again, it's a choice that the operator has to make based on the deployment, the scale, the timing, and so on, that they would have to take care of.
Thank you. Sid, any views on why you went with public
Yeah,
cloud?
so that's a loaded one, by the way. So
We are
again,
limited time.
yeah, no worries. I'll give straight one. Whether an operator chooses to do on-prem or a public cloud or any cloud or completely vertical solution, right? It also
Mhm.
another factor to consider is the what infrastructure or processes the operator has in place already, especially for the brownfield. They already have made huge investments, so it doesn't make sense for them to just give up on the existing investment and jump on a new fancy bandwagon. But on Dish, yeah, we had no baggage, so we are coming from a fresh eyes and said, okay, what is the best way to do this stuff, right? And the principle we have is do it right the first time. And
Mhm.
by the way, we are hybrid cloud in the sense that our DUs are on-prem, they run on VMware. Our CUs and the RIC and management systems, they run on the public cloud on AWS. But what we look for and the benefits that we have with public cloud is that we leverage the tool sets. We are in the business of we are a service provider. We are not really like business of doing a network, make the best network, but we want to offer the best service. So we want to focus our efforts on getting the best service to the customer. What does public cloud do? It gives us the best tool sets out there. It gives us a curated infrastructure and platform that we don't have to worry about. It's on demand. We also get the benefit of silicon advancements that public cloud invests in and we don't have to invest. But the most importantly, it has a huge transport links. I can carry my traffic from one end of the country to another on the public cloud, without having to worry about it. Whether we stay on public cloud forever, maybe, maybe not. I think, but I do see public cloud in our architecture for a long time. As we grow, there's an economic sense, and where we make a choice as to at what point we bring it on-prem or where we stay on a public cloud. But right now, purely from a technology point of view, I see. I mean, public cloud has come a long way compared to where we started 3 years. So I won't say that public cloud is always telco ready. They are now telco ready, and we have worked a lot on it. So now it's really a discussion on the business and economic side rather than technology.
Correct. Yeah,
If I
that's
might
that
chime in,
consideration as well, right? Opex versus capex. Sorry, somebody had a comment
Prakash, if
towards
I
that.
might chime in on this
Yeah,
topic. This
sure.
is a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart because I've been studying this thing for some time now. With all
Okay.
due respect to everyone who has chosen the public cloud, to me, I think public cloud for Open RAN is an incredibly bad choice. And there are two reasons for that, in my opinion. In fact, I think the statement that Sid made is also supportive of what I'm going to be saying, right? Number one is, I think it's very important to understand what is the biggest control point for any organization, right? Is it supply chain? Is it infrastructure? Whatever it is, different industries have different control points. Ceding the control point to somebody else is always a risk to business because that control point is what controls cost, it controls innovation, agility, and so on. So seeding, and in this case, in the 5G network, the network is the control point. The underlying infrastructure is the control point. Seeding it away to somebody else to manage it, to me, again, is an incredibly bad choice. The second point I would say is one of the reasons why public cloud became very popular to begin with in the enterprise space is because public cloud brings instant elasticity to your infrastructure. But if you look at the Open RAN network, it's actually inherently a distributed network. There is no concept of instant elasticity at your edge. You don't magically spin up a 10 more servers at the edge, right? So in that case, the type of automation, the type of innovations that you will use to drive down density or increase density, drive down costs, is fundamentally different than what made the hyperscaler so successful, right? So for these two reasons, I feel that, you know, like somebody else was saying, a short-term decision versus a long-term decision. going with the public cloud route is an extremely short-sighted and short-term solution, in my opinion.
Yeah. Anybody else has views on it?
No, I think
Okay. Yeah.
both of them are spoken. Yeah.
Okay. So next one is to
I think
Partha. Sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I think the point you made about the high degree of distribution of the clouds at or near the radio antenna site, I think is quite important because, like you say, the cloud there looks different than a cloud, like for instance that you chose there for a CU deployment. So I can understand also the approach there with a hybrid solution, thinking around that
Yeah.
as well.
Mhm.
Cool.
So I think
Thanks.
that's where the
I
hybrid.
think just to sorry,
Yeah.
I was just saying just to
Yeah.
Yes,
Go
clarify,
ahead.
that's why
right?
I think the hybrid cloud will help. Okay, Sid, go
Sid,
ahead.
go ahead. Yeah, Sid, go ahead. You had,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you have to
I
answer to
don't want
this
to make it
Partha comment.
contentious. Yeah, yeah. Just don't want to make it contentious, right? I said we are. I agree with what Partha said. Where it makes sense technology-wise, we use public cloud. Where it does not make sense, we are hybrid cloud. We are on-prem on the VDU side. No doubt about that. It is not designed. Public cloud is not going to come to the edge yet. Maybe it will come someday. It's not there today, and that's not what we're using. I think the real question is that what does an operator want to do? Focus on? Do I want to focus on building my infrastructure, or do I want to focus my limited resources and efforts on offering services and creating services for the customer? I think that's a big thing. So with that, I will take a break. Sorry, Sunil, go ahead.
Yeah, Sanil, go ahead
No, I mean,
quickly.
I was no problem. Thanks, Sid. I was trying to highlight the point that I think I agree with Partha, and as well as Sid said, the hybrid cloud is a sweet spot. Maybe at this time, point in time, that you may use the private cloud or on prem to deploy. I mean, VDUs and the public.
I think we lost Sanil there. So let me ask this. We are almost coming to the close of the session. Um, we know all know where Open RAN now is. If we were to meet at a forum like this in say in next 5 years, what do you think would be discussing? What would be the challenges, and what would be the status of Open RAN? I'm hoping you guys have brought your crystal ball to this session, so I know your views on where we'll be in next 5 years. Let's start with Partha quickly.
What would we discuss? Okay, I would basically say this whole idea of totally disaggregated multi-vendor, one vendor providing DU, one vendor providing CU, and then running on somebody else's infrastructure, somebody else's automation scripts. I think that would be an ideal world. I actually want to see if that turns out to be the reality at the pace that we are really hoping it would be. So that is what I would be looking out for in 5 years. True multi-cloud, multi-vendor, not just at the different components, but even within the same Open RAN DUCU coming from different vendors.
And you expect that to happen next 5 years?
I'm actually hoping. I'm an optimist by
Okay.
nature, so I'm
Okay.
hoping that that does
Okay.
happen.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Renuka.
Okay, so I'm gonna put a plug on what Meta's new mission is. I'm gonna say that in next 5 or 10 years, the Open RAN structure becomes default for anchoring what we call the immersive experiences based world that we are going to be in with metaverse. And so I'm going to say that we all being optimists, the question of do we disaggregate, have standard interface, all those questions should go away. It should be the next iteration which performs at the same level that it is expected to and supports the latency, throughput, and so on, the KPIs that are needed for supporting those new applications, the XR use cases, and so on. So that's what I hope the crystal ball actually kind of comes into reality.
Okay. Thank you, Sid.
Well, I wish we don't speak about Open RAN in 5 years. Number one, because I'm getting tired of that. But what I
It
would say
becomes
is
de
that
facto standard. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think what I wish we should be speaking in 5 years is about autonomous networks and the role of what RAN would play in that. You know, so that would be my vision. That Open RAN is given. Don't worry, it's just a means to an end. So that's
Hmm.
done. That's architectural. But let's see the role, how do we make the network autonomous? We talk about level 4, level 5 autonomous cars. Why don't we talk network from that angle in 5 years?
Perfect. Thank you. Gabriel?
I like Sid's vision there. I think it would be quite interesting if we can actually deliver on a lot of the promises and see a lot of exciting new services being adopted instead of just always talking about interfaces and stuff like that. So that would be one. Then I for sure believe that there will be some kind of timeless questions that will remain interesting also in a 5-year perspective. I mean, right now sustainability is a huge issue, obviously with the energy crisis going on. How do we solve for that? I think bringing more, like you said, intelligent into the network, tapping into how do you actively use those resources in the smartest way possible. Having that resiliency that we crave for the network so that it's really secure and available at the right time. I think those kind of things will be more open. Then I think we will still have the discussion on openness, but I think it will, in my humble opinion, I think it will converge between the balance of scale and multi-vendorness, and we will reach a pragmatic conclusion to that. I don't think inherently there's going to be a huge advantage of having hundreds of vendors. So that's approximately where I see us landing with my fairly dimmed crystal ball.
Thank you. Sanil, quickly.
Yeah, and down 5 years down the line, I'm sure we would have advanced much ahead on this Open RAN, virtualized RAN deployment. There is no doubt about that. Of course, like Gabriel said, we might have even saturated a point where there will be multi-vendor deployments. There could be single vendor deployments, but most likely or mostly on the virtualized and Open RAN deployments. It could be either of it. And like Sid said, maybe we will not we need not talk about Open RAN and open interfaces 5 years down the line. Maybe we'll be talking about further new advancements on further optimizing whether it is energy efficiency or other optimizations on the RAN intelligence network and so on. Hopefully, we are at that point in 5 years down the line.
Thank you. I'm afraid that was our last question. We got a lot of very good questions. Sorry that we could not get to all of them. With that, let me thank all the panelists for an engaging and informative session. And of course, thanks to you, the audience, for joining our discussion and asking interesting questions. It indeed was a great pleasure for me to moderate this panel. Hope to catch you soon on next one. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. That was great. Now, to finish off, we'll have our closing keynote by Steve Papa from Parallel Wireless. Steve, the floor is all yours.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. Just orienting. Okay, great. So this is the closing keynote. One of the challenges of preparing one of these is you don't know what's going to be discussed, but knowing how capable the fellow panelists and speakers were, they were going to cover what I would say everything that's happening today. And I think they've done a great job of that. There's a lot of different things to consider. I'm going to try to be a little more thought provocative as I think to the medium term and long term in the spirit of how do we, foster innovation, right? Where does this all go? What are the things we should be doing to get to a much better place? In many ways, a lot of what we're talking about today is constrained by local maximums. If you think back to your high school algebra, and it's how do we get to a much, much better place, which is where operators want to be. So just a quick introduction. Brownfield was mentioned a few times on this call. Parallel wireless is all about the brownfield. That's why we sequenced 2G, 3G, 4G ahead of 5G, because we know that the required maturation in a brownfield network is very different than in a greenfield network. When we are put out there, it's always the case we're asked, can we deliver as good or better than what's already deployed, right? And that's a lot. It takes a long time to get there. We've gotten there. Different than, hey, we've got a greenfield network, or we're putting a greenfield network over an MVNO. These are different challenges, all very challenging, all very important, just different set of things to worry about. Let's continue here. We're working all over the world with many different operators. We tend to be more focused on brownfield, as I mentioned. although we're starting to see that change as well as our 5G is being put out with customers. So the provocative premise I wanted to make in the closing keynote is all of this cloud discussion, is it a symptom of a larger problem or is it the end solution? Okay. I've been thinking about virtualization. Actually, my virtualization thoughts, I spent the early part of my career bringing Intel servers into the data center back in the early 90s, was involved in building infrastructure such as Akamai, where we, made the observation, most of the content is not super low latency. It's only small amounts of it. The bulk, isn't. Probably something that, we can all learn from with these cloudification discussions. In particular, and I'll note, I'm very pleased to see Rakuten embracing Robin's virtualization vision. Been involved there since probably 7-8 years. So, been, like I said, thinking a lot about the impacts of virtualization and its importance for, the infrastructure in general. But we have a fundamental signal processing challenge with 5G and others, is that the more compute we aggregate upstream, the worse the front haul challenge, both the bandwidth and the latency. We can solve for that bandwidth, right? There are solutions to that. There's no solving for latency much harder, right? It's costly, limited by physics, requires that much more compute in different places to squeeze out every last bit of latency. And what I thought I'd do was share a thought experiment, which is out of our RAN cloudification work with a global MNO, which it's really about how to think about our networks differently. In many ways, we're constrained in this local maximum versus a global one. So I'm going to go all the way back to 2G as the illustrative example. As you know, 2G is a workhorse for a lot of the world, less so in the US, but for most operators where there's brownfield, they care a lot about that. And, if you had a fully virtualized 2G, well, how would that improve the world for operators, right? And again, this is a thought experiment, and we're going to tie it back to 5G and 6G. So this was something we did recently, earlier this year with a very large MNO, where we virtualized the 2G. I can't go into what their existing KPIs were, but needless to say, we were pretty much on par or better the moment we deployed it. And it's not surprising in the sense that we were able to develop this, in a modern way versus the 2G that they have deployed was developed a long time ago. It's fully running on a Kubernetes infrastructure, right? And notably the voice quality, so much better, okay? Because we could just do modern techniques. But this thought experiment, why would an operator care about this, right? What are the ways that would improve it for operators, right? There's minimal front haul challenge. It's around 0.5 gig per second for 4 GSM carriers. There's minimal latency challenge, hundreds of kilometers, not a problem. So take a country like the UK, I could probably aggregate all of their 2G processing into whatever they use for their core data centers. Would not need any more than that. And that would be phenomenal. Then their infrastructure would be so much simpler as they manage transitions and generations and whatnot, okay? Front haul is not a constraint at all, okay? If I centralize that 2G, I could stream it into 4G, 5 radios for multi-carrier, 2G, 4G, 5G. We do that today. But with open radio software and partner integrations, you could leverage any 4G, 5G solution and stream in that 2G. You could share that 2G across operators, right? One infrastructure. You could even put a scheduler in that treats different operators based on a willingness to pay. And you could see the elastic compute benefits overnight, right? I generally agree with the comments that, the servers that are pushed furthest out to the edge have a somewhat continuous data cycle. The converse of that is the more I can centralize the compute for more of this, right, the more elasticity I get. For 2G, I get huge elasticity if I do this on a daily cycle. Now, there are features like 2G DSS that makes it harder, but nothing that an API can't resolve to deliver these benefits. So what can we generalize from this, right? What's the lesson here? Well, the lesson is the 3GPP architecture is the problem. We have not taken a fresh approach and revisited how would we do things differently, where there's huge advantages to centralizing processing. And there are some fundamental reasons for that. The operator, the 3GPP spec still assumes an operator has a single chunk of spectrum and everything has to go on it. How many operators have one band of spectrum? Almost none, right? I mean, there's a few, right? It's a multi-band network. I put multi-Gs out there, either on different bands or even on the same band. Yet the spec still has in its core assumptions, the default is you're putting everything out, right? That's why we bundle low latency 5G with bulk data 5G. Why aren't we really segregating, things for very low latency and other things that can tolerate high latency? The bulk of my traffic is always going to be streamed video. It's always going to be the case, right? All that compute can be centralized, or most of it. UEs that aren't moving, where channel conditions are relatively stable, versus ones that are highly mobile, right? These are different conditions, and we treat it as a homogeneous, architecture, instead of, hey, if I can separate these things out, huge optimizations. NB-IoT is a great example. NB-IoT baseband should just be, one location for a country, and it streams into every one of those radios. Okay, right? Why isn't DSS? It's a time division with independent streams. Why don't we focus on forcing that API, just like that 2G API I described? What we need is to virtualize the independent signal processing streams into a radio. And 2G is the perfect thought experiment for that. And then we can maximize the potential from cloudification. So why doesn't this happen? It's because incumbents don't want signal processing virtualization. You even heard some allusions to that on the call today, right? You mean you can share a single radio with Ericsson and Samsung baseband and adjacent carriers in a band? Of course operators want that. But does Ericsson want that? You mean you could leave your existing 3G from Nokia at the site and pipe in Samsung 5G on the same radio? Of course operators want that. But does Nokia? You mean you could keep your low utilization NB-IoT from Ericsson and run ORAN 5G alongside it in the same radio, or run NB-IoT centrally? Of course operators want that. But does Ericsson? And that's why they don't want you to have low latency carriers that can mix with others, which would make cloudification 100x easier and so much less costly, and so many more benefits of elasticity. And I'll share an anecdote, which it's paraphrased from memory. It's been a few years, where I was interviewing someone, and he said, "Look, I was involved in the early LTE rollouts in the USA. My team would do lots of field optimization, which was labor intensive and required insane hours to support. They were having quality of life issues, right? So I wrote a program that automated a lot of these optimizations. The program worked great. We were enhancing it. And when my manager's manager found out about it, he said, we must stop this work because we don't understand Ericsson's business model. There's a lot of money that comes from all those services, okay? So that creates a lot of resistance to things that create much bigger global maximums for operators than creating this local maximum that we're, futzing around with. So the big picture for ORAN is a force for innovation. In fact, if ORAN doesn't deliver on fundamentally different innovation, ORAN not only fails, it just doesn't matter, right? That's really what it's about. It's about moving the knowledge of the end-to-end problem outside of vertically integrated incumbents that are focused on keeping their customers captive, okay? Incumbents won't solve this problem. They're not focused on their customer problems like this. They're focused on the self-preservation of their sticky, exclusive use in an operator's network and encouraging another CapEx cycle. That's why a CapEx cycle. That's why you hear a lot of operators complaining about challenges of their business model in 5G and recovering that capital, okay? You have suppliers are focused on creating a CapEx cycle. They're not focused on solving that fundamental operator problem. ORAN is about innovating to change these operator economics, finding a global, there'll always be a succession of local maximums, but in pursuit of that global maximum. And that only happens as ORAN adoption allows for that innovation. ORAN's perfectly positioned to pioneer the concept of independent signal processing streams, but to unlock that potential, we need operators to hold the 3GPP's feet to the fire. Parallel wireless, we're here to help, whether it's fully virtualizing 2G. I think we're the only ones in the world to prove it, I believe, through 4G, 5G. But we need the operators to pull ORAN in this direction and push the 3GPP at the same time. We don't have to sit and wait for 6G to do that. Okay. If we don't do it before 6G, you're just going to see 6G reinforce incumbent stickiness yet again. Okay. So in the spirit of, what the intention of the closing keynote was, which was think about how is ORAN a force for innovation in an ecosystem over the coming years, this is where it's at. This is where ORAN can make a huge difference and radically simplify these operators networks that are going to continue to go through generational changes. This isn't going to stop. We shouldn't be surprised that there's a 5G. There'll be a 6, there'll be a 7. In fact, if we solve this problem, we won't be making a big deal about it because the heterogeneity of what will be able to be supported will be tremendous. You'll have networks where you can introduce new features on some of your radios, and maybe some that haven't been upgraded or are not as modernized, they can't. That's what we'll be doing. It's just that we have this mentality stuck in the past of the original, probably back to amps, and how we think of, hey, I deploy a technology, it's homogeneous, it doesn't change, right? That's the problem. And we're scratching around the surface, worrying about pushing firmware and whatnot. All are important things, but we have to embrace a fundamentally different framework for thinking about the network. And operators have to take the lead on that and grab back control at the 3GPP, because the incumbents that are dominating there, that are just focused on, keeping score on whose bit of IP gets in the standard, are not going to do this for you. So with that, it's great to be here, and look forward to speaking to all of you operators in our regular engagements as we work to upgrade your brownfield. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. And of course, thank you to the sponsors of this session. So that actually concludes this session for now, but there is still more to come. So make sure you join us back here at 12 p.m. Eastern, where we'll hear from John Brand from Marvel and Roy Chua. See you soon.